Hi, I'm Carolyn Coyne. I'm a professor of molecular genetics and microbiology at Duke University, and I'm excited to be a co-organizer of the Infections in Pregnancy Keystone Symposia in January 2023 in Santa Fe, which is a joint meeting with the Maternal-Fetal Crosstalk meeting. I think I was most excited about bringing in a lot of fresh perspectives on emerging infections, a lot of the infections in pregnancy that we don't often think about. I think this was really highlighted during COVID-19, when of course very early in the pandemic everyone started to worry, especially pregnant women, about the health of their fetus, of course their own health. And so I think it's really important to bring together a group of collaborative and multidisciplinary investigators to really start to think about not only existing infections in pregnancy, but what could be future infections in pregnancy as well. So I think we'll see a lot of representation, of course, of individuals who are experts in reproductive biology, but also in infectious diseases and immunology, even in tissue modeling and tissue engineering of the maternal-fetal interface. And so I think having all of these different disciplines together will allow everyone to have a really nice meeting where we can see each other's sort of most exciting, newest research and hopefully work together and establish even some new collaborations. For me personally, I think the fact that we even ourselves have struggled with modeling the human placenta, I am most excited to see how people are taking these new models that have been developed and applying to them to their own infection biology. And I think really for me that's what's going to make me most excited, and that's what I'm really looking forward to seeing. And so when we were organizing the meeting, we very much wanted to represent really all facets of microbiology. And so I also think that's something that really sets apart this meeting, is that we're not going to just be talking about viruses or bacteria or parasites that cause infections in pregnancy. We're really going to have speakers that cover all different topics and all different kinds of microorganisms, some of which you may have heard about, but probably some that you haven't and maybe would want to. I think for me, bringing together investigators that have expertise in some very advanced infection models with investigators that have expertise in really just reproductive biology, well, that's really, I think, where the advances in the field are going to come from. Because, just to highlight this, I think this was really something we experienced during the Zika virus outbreak, where there was a need, of course, from virologists to understand the placenta, and those, of course, placental biologists then wanting to do virology. And so I think the more we can kind of bring those kinds of sides together, the more we're going to be able to combat infections in pregnancy and really hopefully protect maternal and fetal health. I think one of the really exciting things about a meeting that really focuses on infections in pregnancy is really comparing and contrasting different microorganisms that do or do not bypass the placental defenses, and what can we learn about how the placenta functions. And so an example of that, of course, is that we're living in the midst of a pandemic in which we now know that SARS coronavirus 2 does not cross the placenta. But certainly very early on in the pandemic there was a lot of fear about that, and rightfully so. Whereas, of course, just not that long ago, we had Zika virus that we know, unfortunately, did bypass the placental defenses. And so I think the more that we can talk about the differences between how different microorganisms can or cannot bypass those defenses, the more we can really advance maternal and fetal health. So I think the Infections in Pregnancy Keystone is really going to bring together a lot of infectious disease researchers that, although perhaps historically have not been really focused on maternal fetal health, have kind of been drawn to that both either by clinical presentation or just general interests. And so I think we're going to see a lot of really strong representation of microbiologists and infectious disease researchers. Certainly that will represent both the clinical side as well as the basic science side. I think on the maternal-fetal crosstalk side of the meeting, we're going to see really a lot of really outstanding reproductive biologists, immunologists that really understand the dialogue that happens at the interface. And so I think bringing together those sets of researchers will really then allow the field to advance forward. So we have a session that's really going to be focused on therapeutics as well as vaccination and pregnancy. This is a topic that, unfortunately almost always gets overlooked, but is fundamental to protecting, I think, the health of both the pregnant woman as well as the developing fetus. And so we're going to bring together researchers that really focus specifically on this area to talk about how we might then advance therapeutics for either current existing microorganisms that might cause maternal or fetal disease, or potentially future outbreaks that may be associated with that as well. I think there's going to be a lot for everyone here. I always like to see trainees represented at Keystone meetings. This is something Keystone meetings have been a part of my life ever since I was a very young trainee and certainly a young faculty member. And you can really then begin to build a community of researchers. And so I'd really like to see basic scientists. I think there's something here for clinicians. I think there's something at the meeting certainly for those that aren't even experts in the field, but perhaps the topics or the tools that they study might be applicable to the field. And so I really think that I would encourage anyone who has an interest in pregnancy, maternal-fetal interface, maternal-fetal immunology. I think this will be a really outstanding meeting for really everyone.